Hello everybody, it's Whiskey11, and it's time to continue our DCS World FA-18 videos, and in this video we're going to cover takeoff, patterns, and landing on an aircraft carrier. That's right, carrier ops with none other than Whiskey11, of somebody who is probably the least qualified out of everybody here to talk about aircraft carrier takeoffs and landings. What's not to like about that? Before we can take off, we've got a couple of things that we need to talk about first. One of the most important aspects of taking off in a Hornet is making sure that all of our systems are set correctly for the actual takeoff. And with that, let's go ahead and just get started. So the first thing I always like to do when I take off is I need to set up our two DDI pages here. On the left one, I like to set to the HUD, which if you're on the main menu, HUD is this button there. And I also like to set the right DDI to the FCS page. If you're on the TAC page, you need to move it to the support page and then hit FCS. This will give us all of our flight control surfaces and what they're doing. It will also tell us if there are any errors with the aircraft. If you see X's here, generally speaking means that either you forgot to start up an engine or you forgot to do the FCS reset, in which case go back and rewatch my starting guide for the Hornet, the quick start guide. So with that, we've got these two set up. There's one important part of this FCS page that we really need to make sure that we have set correctly for takeoff. That's this value here that says stab, which is for the horizontal stabilizers, and those are what would normally be called an elevator, except for these also change in role as well, so they're kind of like ailerons. I forget, they have a special name. Anyway, what's important is this value needs to be between 15 and 16. So the best way to start this process is to go ahead and look down here behind our throttles. You'll see something that says RUD trim. Now that's for the rudder. But if you push down on the button on the top, you can see there the label says TO trim push. So if we push on the top, that sets takeoff trim. And we come back to our FCS and we can see that it's only at 12. Like I said, we need to be between 15 and 16 for a takeoff in our current configuration. So we will go ahead and use our trim nose up button and trim it to 15 degrees. So with that set, we are now ready to look at our next thing. We've got our flaps are set to half. We are going to wait to turn on our landing and taxi lights until we are ready to landing and taxi. Make sure our anti-skid is off. Our hook bypass is set to carrier, although we don't need our hook currently. We are also going to make sure we've got our formation and pattern lights on, which they are. And the next big important thing for us to do is to make sure that the pattern is actually clear for us to take off and taxi. The pattern around an aircraft carrier for landing aircraft is going to be in a counterclockwise fashion, which means from our current position on the aircraft carrier, we are going to have to look basically over our shoulder. Aircraft will be coming and flying just to the starboard side of the ship, basically where that Seahawk is at. Be flying over there, coming around to the left, behind us, coming around, and then down and onto the deck of the aircraft. As we can see, there's only one aircraft out there in the pattern, and I don't actually believe it's in the pattern. I believe it's well above the pattern, flying in a circle around the aircraft carrier battle group. So we're going to basically go ahead and ignore him. The next thing that we need to do is we need to check to see which catapult we are actually going to taxi to. In this case, because of all the aircraft currently parked on the deck, I'm going to taxi to catapult 3. They are numbered from the starboard side to the port side 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're going to taxi to catapult 3 because it's the easiest. So for us to do that, the first thing that we need to do is we need to actually remove the wheel chocks, because as you can see, we have wheel chocks on. So to do that, we open up our radio menu by hitting the backspace, going to F8, the ground crew, wheel chocks, remove.
Chief, remove the wheel chocks. Copy. Wheel chocks are now removed.
With the wheel chocks removed, we can now begin to move forward if we disable our parking brake. But before we do that, we need to talk about nose wheel steering. On board the aircraft carrier, we need to make sure that our nose wheel steering is set to high in order for us to maneuver the tightest that we can. As you can see on the HUD, there is this indicator that says NWS, that stands for nose wheel steering. It does not have anything after it, which means we are currently in the lowest setting for nose wheel steering. If we press the S key, you will notice that it goes to NWS high, nose wheel steering high. This allows us to turn the tightest that we possibly can. We don't have to continue to hold the S button because our wings are still folded. When the wings become unfolded, it will revert back to just standard nose wheel steering, and in order to get nose wheel steering high, you have to press and hold the S key while you are trying to maneuver. If you release the S key, it will always go back to just nose wheel steering. So now that we've covered that, we can go ahead and release our parking brake by left-clicking on the parking brake, and we are now ready to taxi. It's again doing our quick check to make sure that there's no aircraft in the pattern, and as you can see, we're good. So we are going to throttle up, and we are going to go ahead and now turn to the left to line up for Catapult 3. Generally speaking, in multiplayer, if the server is running SRS or simple radio, I always like to make sure that I call out. In this case, I would have called out Hornet 311 taxiing to Catapult 3 on Stennis. Okay, about this point, we want to make sure that we get our wings unlocked, so we come down here to our wing fold button and we right-click on it twice. This will move the wings down into the extended position. We have to wait for them to get there, but once they're there, we'll check them. Left wing is down, right wing is down. Now we will take and we will go ahead and use the mouse wheel forward to lock the wings. You will notice that the wing lock warning has gone away from our left DDI. We're not ready yet. We got to come down here. Oop, we forgot our taxi lights. Generally speaking, you want to turn those on before you taxi or take off. We come down here to the launch bar and we extend it. So with the launch bar extended, you will notice that nose wheel steering is no longer a thing. So you want to do this once you've gotten lined up. Now we are not close enough to the actual launch bar point, so we need to taxi forward a little bit. And if you're ever curious about how far you need to go forward, you can always use the F2 view, and you can see here we're actually pretty far away. Okay, so we're just gonna throttle up a little bit. There we go. Okay, so the area in which we are trying to get our nose wheel into, you can actually see where the shuttle is at on the catapult, but you can also see there is a dark gray box there. We need to get it somewhere in that box in order for this to actually work. So with our launch bar down, we can hit the U key on our keyboard and it will hook us up to the catapult. It'll pull you forward, the engine blast deflectors will go up, and now it's time for us to make our final check before we take off. I always check our stabilizer trim, set to 15 where it should be. Launch bar can be hit to the retract position. This does not actually retract the launch bar, as you can see. What this will do is when we take off, it will retract it before the landing gear come up. This is a requirement for the landing gear to come up on the real aircraft. In the game, it happens automatically. I just do it because of habit. Our flaps are set to half. We are ready to go. So at this point, I would get on the radio and say Hornet 311 departing Stennis, Cat 3. I would then floor the throttle all the way to the afterburner detent, because why not? And we sit and wait. And we're off. It's as easy as that. Once you get off, you want to raise your landing gear. You also want to raise your flaps from half to auto. Once you hit 300 knots, back off the afterburner to either mill or just below it. We call this Buster. You'll hear me say that on the live stream. And on the multiplayer servers, you want to remain below 500 feet above sea level until you are about 10 nautical miles away from the aircraft carrier. If the aircraft carrier pattern is not particularly full, like in this case, oftentimes you'll see people just pull on out. The NatOps, I think, actually says that is supposed to be a lot longer. something like 18 nautical miles or something like that. Generally speaking, it's not that important to get it exactly right. This is a video game after all. So from here, that's takeoff. So from here, what I want to talk about is I want to talk about patterns. As I mentioned while we were on the carrier deck, the pattern around the aircraft carrier for landing aircraft is a counterclockwise racetrack, which means there are 280-degree turns with straights between the 180-degree turns. Those are going to be on the upwind and downwind portion. It's the same style of pattern as would be over a conventional airfield. However, landing on an aircraft carrier is still yet more complex. There's a couple things that I want to talk about, and we're going to use this opportunity while we're just flying around in the air to talk about a couple of very key and important factors about landing a Hornet or any aircraft on the deck of an aircraft carrier. So one of those concepts is actually on-speed angle of attack. In order to demonstrate this, we have to get the aircraft into a landing configuration. So I've got my my speed brakes are up. I'm going to lower my hook, although we don't really need it. And we're going to try and keep our nose up here until we slow down enough to get the on-speed angle of attack indicator to show up. What on-speed angle of attack is a specific way in which the aircraft has to fly in order to land on an aircraft carrier. This usually happens around 135 to 145 knots, depending on your weight. Speaking of which, we should probably check that to make sure that we are actually under that weight. So we hit this button twice to get to the support page, then checklist. And you can see here we're at 32,000 pounds. The maximum landing weight for a Hornet is 35,000 pounds, so we are under that. Okay, so we can go ahead and lower our gear as well as our flaps to full. And there's a couple of things that have changed on our HUD. On-speed angle of attack is, like I mentioned, it's the attitude of the aircraft relative to the hook. And in order for us to land, we have to be what is called on-speed AOA. We know we are on-speed AOA by two distinct factors in our HUD area. The first one is this left display here. It has actually three symbols on it. It has two carets, one that points towards the center, one that points, well, they both point towards the center, I guess, and then the circle. The circle indicates that we are actually on speed angle of attack. If you see a red arrow pointing up, that means that you are fast. That means that the nose is not high enough and your hook is not low enough. If you see a green arrow, that means that you are slow. Your nose is too high and your hook is too low. Landing like that can actually cause damage to the landing gear because the hook will catch, the landing gear will then hit, and then the nose gear will come slamming down. So we definitely don't want that. We want an orange donut. There are two other options here in which we are slightly fast or slightly slow, and those will be a combination of the carets above or below, depending on which, and the orange circle. The other option that we have here is actually this E bracket, and this is the most accurate way to measure your on-speed angle of attack. You can see here that we are just below this center line here. What we want is this velocity indicator to be lined up right here with the center E on the E bracket. That is on-speed angle of attack. Now, if you don't use trim at all, it is a metric pain in the butt to keep this in the correct location relative to everything. So my recommendation is quite simple. If you haven't bound the trim button to anything yet on your throttle or on your stick, do so now, because it is going to be significantly easier if you do so. What you're going to do is you're actually going to trim the aircraft to on-speed angle of attack. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we are trimming. You can actually see the trim inputs over on the FCS page. We're a little slow, and now we are on speed. At this point, you can fly this aircraft by using nothing more than the throttle and the ailerons. And you can see we're about 133 knots or so we're not in level flight, but we're pretty close to it. At this point, the nose will rise with more throttle input, and it will fall with less throttle input. When you're on final onto the carrier, you should not be touching the elevator at all. It should all be throttle inputs. You will use the ailerons to go ahead and roll the aircraft a little bit, but all of your major altitude corrections are going to be done entirely with the throttle. It's a really confusing concept, I know. However, once you get used to this level of flying, and I highly recommend you just try it out, get into a mission and just trim for on-speed AOA, get yourself in the landing configuration with your flaps all the way down, your gear down, your hook down, and fly like this. Just get used to flying like this. Get used to the fact that I'm not touching the stick, I'm not pulling back or pushing forward on it. I'm just using the throttle for maintaining level flight. The other part about this is you also notice that there are going to be points at which you're going to oscillate about this like equilibrium point. And somewhat this can be corrected by rocking the throttle back and forth. And once you do that, you can see that those oscillations really kind of level out here. And I'm moving it forward and back probably about a half an inch or so. Got a little high there. Around a point at which I think the throttle needs to be. There is no one throttle position for you to land at. You're going to have to kind of do this throttle jockeying back and forth. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put the burner in. We're going to go ahead and raise our hook, and we're going to get back in the pattern. All of this is going to have to happen in a really rather short period of time around the aircraft carrier, and it all happens relatively quick. Alright, let me put my waypoint back up here so that I've got a distance measurement to the carrier. So we're about 10.3 nautical miles. Let's say we're on our way back from our mission and we're inbound to the carrier. At this point, what I would do is I would get on the radio and I would say something like, Whiskey 1-1 inbound to Stennis in Hornet, 10 nautical miles behind. And at that point, people in the airspace know that I am inbound. They have a relative idea of where I'm at, the distance, and how long it is I'm going to actually be before I can get back into the pattern. So, actually find the carrier group here. Who would have thought we would get lost on our magical trip? There's the carrier group. Okay, so like I mentioned, the pattern on the ships is going to fall into this counterclockwise racetrack pattern. The pattern altitude starts at 1,200 feet, goes down to 800 feet on the downwind, that's going against the ship, and then on your final turn you need to be at about 370 feet or so as you level your wings out to come onto the deck. And we'll explain some of these a little bit more. But before you get into this pattern, you have to be above 2,000 feet to stay out of the way of other aircraft until the pattern is clear enough for you to actually get in. In this case, there are no other aircraft, so we're just going to go ahead and we're going to fly straight into the pattern. You can see that our carrier battle group here is moving at about 355 as the heading for it, or about 000 thereabouts. That means that our downwind leg is going to be at roughly 180. When we enter this pattern, we want to be going about 350 knots. 350 knots at 1,200 feet as we go on past our carrier. And at this point, you can see there's no trim on the stabilizer. We don't have anything down except for we're going to put our hook down as we get closer. So as we get ready to transition from the 2,000 feet holding altitude, we're going to get on the radio once again and say Hornet 311 in the pattern for the Stennis. And then we're going to go ahead and descend to 1,200 feet, trying our best to maintain about 350 knots. Again, we want to fly it's called the base recovery course. This is the course at which the carrier is actually moving, which in our case is about 000. Okay? So we are now flying past the Stennis, and we can see that the deck is clear. So at about 1 to 1.5 nautical miles from the carrier, we want to start our left-hand brake. And that left-hand brake needs to be about 1% of our speed. So in this case, we're going 375 knots. That means our brake needs to be 3.7 Gs or thereabouts. Doesn't have to be perfect, just needs to be thereabouts. I've got my speed brake out. At 250 knots, we're going to lower our landing gear and deploy our flaps to full. There's our landing gear coming down. Our flaps are also coming down. And we're going to roll out at about 180 degrees. So at this point, we need to be trimming the aircraft. It's going to want to come nose up on you, but we need to be trimming the aircraft to try and get to on-speed AOA. This happens exceptionally quick. Okay, so we are a little slow. There we go. Now we're getting in the groove. So at this point, we need to be about 800 feet, and we want to be on speed angle AOA, angle of attack. We're a little high in this pattern, but that's all right. So as you can see, we managed to get into this. We're now just a little bit of a sink rate, and I'm oscillating the throttle back and forth. Look at that. And we are looking for about this picture. So at this point, we're starting to see the round down at the back end of the aircraft carrier. That is the point at which the aircraft carrier deck rounds down into the back portion of the ship. We need to see that to make our left-hand turn. Once we see that, we can go ahead and make our left-hand turn of about 30 degrees. You will need to add a little bit of power in order to maintain altitude, but we do need to lose just a little bit of altitude. Like I said, we want to be about 370 feet behind the ship. 370 feet in terms of altitude when we get behind the ship. Okay, losing a little bit too much there. I'm going to roll just a little bit further out of this. Add a little bit of power. Once you get to the 90 degree mark, take a quick peek at the aircraft carrier. Just a little bit fast in terms of our AOA. And again, I'm not really using the elevators at all at this point, and we're also a little bit high. So we're going to come down in altitude. Again, alternating our throttle to try and bring power up. About 3/4 mile, we're going to start to see some things line up. So at 3/4 of a mile, you should start to see what is called the ball. You will hear, if there's an LSO and you're on final at 3/4 of a mile, he will say 3/4 of a mile, call the ball. You will say your Hornet, board number, Hornet, ball, fuel status. So in my case, it's 311 Hornet ball, 4.9. You can see I have the ball there. I'm on speed angle of attack, and I'm aiming the velocity vector of this. I want to be aiming at about this point in the ship right here. This is called the crotch of the ship. We are on speed angle of attack. We have the ball in sight. The ball is this yellow ball. And we want to reference it relative to these green datum lines is what they're called. When the ball is above the green datum lines, that means we are above the glide slope. If it's below the green datum lines, if it is still yellow, we're just slightly below. If it is flashing red, that means we need to wave off. Generally speaking, though, you want to keep this ball moving, preferably a little high at the start, work your way down, and you want to follow this all the way to the deck. So with this, I'm going to try my best to land this on the aircraft carrier without crashing. You need a lot of power. And we need to come back. Okay, so we are just now a little bit more power. A little bit more power. Okay, coming in, a little less power. And a little bit more. And once you hit the deck, you want to floor the throttle. That was a really bad landing. We caught the one wire, if I remember correctly. Yeah, we landed a little short. And when you don't have when you're not having enough speed, you will catch different wires. The ideal wire to hit is going to be the third wire of the 4. Catching the one wire is bad because it is the closest to the back of the ship, which means that you are most likely going to hit the back of the ship if you don't land correctly, if you lose too much power. The ideal wire to hit is the third wire. The second and fourth wires are generally okay to hit, but the one wire is one in which you get a lot of frowning done. In this case, we put the aircraft down. It was a safe one wire, as safe as a one wire can be, and we are officially on the deck of the aircraft carrier. At this point, you need to hurry up and get off of the deck of the aircraft carrier. So remember what I was mentioning about the nose wheel steering and how if the wings are still extended, you have to hold the S key in order to get nose wheel steering high. It's a perfect example of that. Clear the deck. Come off the deck as quickly as possible. Stop it. Fold your wings. So in order to fold the wings, you use the mouse wheel back. Once they're unlocked, 2 left clicks will fold them, and you'll start to see them come up. Eventually. It's going to make a liar out of me. You're going to have to move forward just a little bit. And then we're going to go ahead and hit S one more time to get nose wheel steering high on. There they go. Now they're starting to fold. And now you can taxi to your parking area to go ahead and do whatever it is that you need to do. Anyway, I hope this video has really helped. We caught a one wire there at the very end, but I hope it's really kind of helped you understand a little bit about on-speed AOA, how to land the Hornet on the aircraft carrier deck. It takes a lot of practice to get really good at landing and catching a perfect 3-wire every single time. We were a little right. I would say that that's definitely not a good landing in terms of grading, but nobody died on the landing, and it wasn't overly terrible in terms of getting, I just fell a little bit behind the power curve on the way in, and we sunk just a little too quickly. Anyway, I hope this has been a good help for you. I'm Whiskey11. Like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks for watching.